Hi, my name is Trevor Klee. This is the GRE Reading Comprehension process. I'm showing specifically how I make my GRE Reading Comprehension process work on short passages. So long passages tend to be the one that really drive people nuts in terms of wasting time, but short passages people tend to make a lot of errors on as well. So here's always my overall goal on reading comprehension, which is I never want to read the whole passage. I want to solve every question without reading the whole passage, and especially without rereading the whole passage. If I reread the whole passage, that's not good. If I reread the whole passage, then I've really messed up. So how do we solve reading comprehension passages without reading or rereading the whole passage? Well, I have to follow the process. So let's talk about the process. So first, I skim the passage to get a basic idea of what it's about and how it's organized. Now, my favorite way of doing that is by reading first sentence, last sentence. Sometimes when you're reading a very short passage that gets you basically the entire passage already. So, that's in which case we're not going to be reading the first sentence and last sentence of each paragraph. We'll just read the whole passage. But we don't want to actually pay attention to all the details. We just want to get a basic idea. What is it about and how is it organized? So, this should really only be enough to answer a primary purpose question. No more. If you find yourself reading so much that you can answer more than that, you've read too much. So we're only going to skim it enough to answer primary purpose. And as we're skimming it, we're going to focus on shifts in point of view. Who believes what? So they're always going to be important. What does the author believe? What does this person mention believe? What does the opposing argument believe? We are always going to pay attention to shifts in points of view. All right. Second step, the process. So we've skimmed the passage. We get a basic idea of what it's about and how it's organized. Now we're going to analyze each question for key terms. So this is going to tell us what specifically we need to read in the passage. So if they say, what does, the governor of Texas believe? We skim the passage and we find where it talks about the governor of Texas. Next, once we've analyzed the question for key terms, we find and read the exact sentence or sentences required by the question. This we're going to read pretty carefully because that's going to be our clue to our answer. What exactly does that sentence or sentences say? If the question demands context, so if it says something like, what is the purpose of this passage? Or, what is the purpose of the sentence? That sort of thing. We also read the sentence before for context. Last up, we're going to go to our answer choices and we're going to pick the answer choice that corresponds to what we read in the passage. We're going to cross out any that seem incorrect, and we're going to pay particular attention to language here. So weak answers are better answers. If it says, this may be true, that's going to be a better answer than this is definitely true. Because this may be true is going to be more often correct than this is definitely true, right? Like Joe Biden may be our next president is correct. Joe Biden will be our next president. One can only hope. So if we, on the other hand, sometimes the question's going to be tricky enough that we have to go back and we have to go to our answer choices or go back to the passage based on the answer choices. So we go back to step 3. If we have to do that, we will, but we're going to want to limit that because that takes a lot of time. So we really want to cross out as much as we can before we go back to that. All right, so this is the process. Skim the passage, analyze the question for key terms, find and read the exact sentence or sentences required by the question, read them carefully, and then read and answer, analyze each answer choice, cross out the ones that seem correct, and see what you get. So, nice to talk about in the abstract, but let's see what it looks like specifically. So I'm take passage in question below. I've taken it from my book, the GRE Reading Comprehension Process, which you can find on gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. Highly recommend it because it's a great book that shows you how to read and analyze passages and get the correct answer, especially if you're a slow or bad reader. But it's also helpful for pretty much anyone who wants to get top scores on reading comprehension. So gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. All right, with that in mind, let's get on to this passage. So we're going to first start by skimming it, as that is the first step in our process. So, sample passage. Smith versus Allwright, Supreme Court case, question whether or not states had the constitutional right to deny voters based on party membership. Smith argued that since the policy did not allow him in a state election, the party was not independent of the state. So we've already got our main idea of the first paragraph. We've got a Supreme Court case which questioned whether or not states had the constitutional right to deny voters based on party membership. And Smith, who is presumably the Smith in Smith versus Allwright, argued that since this policy did not allow him to participate in a state election, the party was not independent of the state. Sort of makes sense. That's the connection between denying voters based on party membership. In this ruling, the Supreme Court had considered Grovey versus Townsend, a similar case in which a voter was denied an absentee ballot for the Texas Democratic primary on the grounds of party statute that only allowed white voters. Okay. The ruling in Smith versus Allwright reversed this decision, concluding that the state of Texas simply delegated its authority to the Democratic Party. All right. So in the ruling for Smith versus Allwright, they considered Grovey versus Townsend, in which a voter was denied an absentee ballot on the grounds of party statute that only allowed white voters. And Smith versus Allwright reversed this decision, concluding the state of Texas had delegated its authority to the Democratic Party. Seems to make sense. So first paragraph, we introduce Smith versus Allwright. We introduce Smith's argument. And then the second paragraph, we get, what the Supreme Court decides based on Grovey versus Townsend. And apparently the Supreme Court basically agrees with Smith. All right, cool. So our first question is a primary purpose question. So we should be able to answer this with just the information we have in our summary. So that's the point of our skimming or our summary, just enough to answer the primary purpose. So the passage is primarily concerned with A, recounting a specific case about state-sponsored repression. No, that's not correct, because it's not just a state-sponsored repression. It's specifically this idea of like voting, voting rights, and we get pretty detailed into what their reasoning is here. Explaining the rationale and ruling of a court case on disenfranchisement. Yeah, exactly. Rationale, totally. We say, here's what they thought, here's what the background was, here's what they concluded. So B is pretty good. C, presenting a logical case against disenfranchisement. No. By the way, disenfranchisement is a vocab word that you do need to know in case you don't. It's like denying the right to vote. So that is an important vocab word. To vote. Important vocab word. All right. Studying a specific example of disenfranchisement. Nope, we are not studying a specific example of disenfranchisement. We're talking about a specific court case showing how the Democratic Party retained power in Texas. That is way too broad. We are talking about a specific court case and what it said about disenfranchisement. We're not talking about the Democratic Party in Texas in general. Alrighty, cool. For the following question, select all that apply. According to the passage, which of the following was true before the ruling on Smith versus Allwright? So this is one where we don't know enough, so we have to go back. So what was true before the ruling on Smith versus Allwright? So we know from here, before Smith versus Allwright, this is what the case was about. So let's read this. Democratic Party of Texas denied Smith the right to vote on the basis of his skin color. Smith was attempting to cast his vote for a Democratic primary in which candidates for the House of Representatives, Senate, and governor were being nominated in addition to other state officers. And then this is about his argument. So what was happening before this ruling is he had been denied the right to vote on the basis of his skin color, and he was attempting to cast his vote for a Democratic primary. Let's see. And then what else do we get? Here we get, the Grove v. Townsend, which is what's happening before, in which a voter was denied absentee ballot for Texas Democratic primary on grounds of party statute that only allowed voters. Grove v. Townsend, the Supreme Court had ruled as this was a party policy, it did not qualify as state action. All right. So there are no limits on the policies that a given party in Texas can enact. Is this true? No, definitely not. No limits is really strong. The Texas Democratic Party had a certain amount of leeway on policies that the Texas government did not have. Yeah, because that was actually the point of the ruling, right? Is that's the point of them delegating their authority to the Democratic Party was the Democratic Party did something that the state of Texas could not. So yes, state of Texas did not permit non-white people to vote. That doesn't seem true. It seemed to be the Texas Democratic Party didn't. So if I want confirmation of this, I have to go up to where we talk about what the Texas state can do. And this says, while holding policies that allow citizens of only a particular race to vote is inherently discriminatory, question was whether the Texas Democratic Party was free to make policies as it pleased. So yeah, it seems like the state of Texas probably did have to allow non-white people to vote because that was the whole, delegation of authority. All right. All right. Question 3. Author of the ruling, the passage. Sorry about the weird thing going on there. This copy paste went terribly wrong. Author of the ruling in the passage, state of Texas had simply delegated its authority to the Democratic Party. Would be most likely to conclude what about disenfranchisement efforts in the South in general? So let's make sure we understand this ruling. Right? The ruling in Smith v. Allwright reversed this decision, concluding the state of Texas had simply delegated its authority to the Democratic Party. And so what is this relating to? Well, this is relating to the idea up here in Grove v. Townsend, right? Because we're saying we're reversing that decision. So what are we reversing? Like Texas Democratic Party, before we had said it was okay for the Texas Democratic Party to only allow white voters. But the ruling says, well, no, you're just delegating your authority to the Democratic Party. You're doing something as a party that you can't do as a state. So would be most likely to conclude, what about disenfranchisement efforts in the South in general? All right. They were universally illegal. Nope. We don't know about universally illegal. This is a pretty narrow case. So, can't say that. They're most likely legal as long as they, again, we don't know about most likely legal. We really only know about this specific case. Though morally despicable, they were not illegal. No. Any that caused disenfranchisement of a citizen solely on the basis of his race was illegal. That seems actually pretty good, right? Because that was sort of the ruling is well, you can't just delegate your authority to disenfranchise a citizen because of skin color. So D is actually pretty good. E, any that involved decisions made about absentee ballots were likely legal unless that's too broad. Who knows what they thought about absentee ballots in general. So D, yeah. And then last one up, which of the following, if true, would most weaken the conclusion in Smith v. Allwright? State of Texas simply delegated its authority to Democratic primary. So the conclusion is this, right? And then when we say they had simply delegated their authority to the Democratic Party, what do we mean? Well, we know that the idea here, Smith's argument is the policy does not allow him to participate in a state election. So the party was not independent of the state. So the conclusion is they delegated their authority because he was not allowed to participate in a state election. So whenever we get to weaken the conclusion, right, we always have to think about it as an argument, which is what's the conclusion and what's the reasoning? It's key here. What's the conclusion? What's the reasoning? And so here we've got what the conclusion is, and here we've got what the reasoning is. So, which of the following would most weaken the conclusion? Well, what would weaken that reasoning? That he had simply delegated its authority because he was not able to participate in state election. There are multiple political parties in Texas for which Smith could have voted in their primary. No, presumably that was already true, right? Presumably it wasn't just the Democratic Party that he could have voted in their election. I think the point was more like if you deny him voting in the Democratic election, then Democratic primary, then he can't vote in the real election. So no. There's only one nominee per Democratic position. No, I mean, he's still not able to participate in it, right? That's the important thing is, okay, maybe in that election, he couldn't, there was only one nominee, but what in future elections? Like they still have the same rule. So B doesn't count. C, the vote itself was not binding, but merely an expression of support. Yeah, that seems pretty good, right? Because that's like, he's not actually like unable to participate in the election. If C was true, he would just be unable to participate in like showing support. Okay, cool. Republican Party had no such restrictions on voting based on race. Yeah, I mean, that was probably true, but also it doesn't really matter, right? Like the point is he couldn't vote in the Democratic Party primary. Is that, simply delegating authority? Then Texas still maintained ultimate authority over the results of the election. I mean, that wouldn't weaken the conclusion. I mean, that was probably true, but like the point is he couldn't participate. Even if Texas had ultimate authority, Smith couldn't participate. So C is the only one that works because that weakens the idea that it's like him not being allowed to participate in an election. Because if it's just an expression of support, it's not a real election. All right, cool. So that is the process. We skimmed the passage, got a basic idea of how it was organized, first sentence, last sentence, analyzed each question for key terms. We went back to the passage as we needed, got the sentence or sentences that the question was about, and then we found the answer choices that applied, crossed out any that seemed incorrect. If you want to see a lot more of this, first of all, keep an eye out on my YouTube channel because I'll be releasing more videos on GRE Reading Comprehension. And also take a look on my book on reading comprehension, gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. Lots of tips for slow or bad readers on reading comprehension. So yeah, take a look. Tell me what you think. Like and subscribe. Stay tuned. Thanks.